This program is brought to you by Emory University.
Thanks so much for your time and attention. We will get back to the program and reconvene. Hope you feel refreshed from the break. Obviously, we have a lot more ahead. Ask that you join us to resume our program and looking at, now that we've understood a little bit more about identifying and serving the needs of children, to really look at the role of the courts and the response and crafting the response and leading the response to victims of human trafficking. And with us for that conversation is Danielle Malangoni and Judge Herbert. Not because of any sort of honor that they don't bestow on us, but to let you all know that for the sake of time, all of the biographical information for all of our speakers is in the materials, so this way we can just dedicate the time to them sharing their expertise. Please join me in welcoming our next two speakers, Danielle Malangoni and Judge Herbert.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm going to get right to it because we only have 20 minutes for this session, but I did want to make two really quick points. The first is we've been hearing a lot so far about kids and child sex trafficking victims. And I just want to reiterate, and some of the panelists from the last panel mentioned this, that it's not just kids, it can be adults as well. So oftentimes it's that 12 or 14-year-old that might first appear in family court or through the child welfare system that maybe falls through the cracks. And then they end up in the adult criminal court system. And now they're the 20, 30, 40-year-old woman or man or transgender even arrested for prostitution or some other type of offense. So I just want to reiterate that point. So now what we're going to do is, so we heard a lot about who the victims are, and we started to touch upon what the courts can do. But now I hope in the next 20 minutes we can drill deeper, as deep as we can drill in a short period of time. So without further ado, Judge, I was hoping you could begin by just telling us about the catch court and how it got started. And most importantly, when you had that moment in which you recognized that that defendant standing before you wasn't in fact a defendant, but a victim.
Thank you, Danielle, and good morning, everybody. Good to be here. So in 2006, there was a study done that showed that the city of Columbus, Ohio was spending $4.9 million a year to arrest and jail prostitutes in Columbus, Ohio. And for me, that was what we called a revolving door offense. Anybody heard of that? You know, where you get arrested, you do your jail time, you get back out, you get arrested again, 15, 20 different charges, and nothing was working. Fast forward to about 2008, you know, and I'm a municipal court judge, okay? So we deal with prostitution cases. About 1,000 to 1,500 women get arrested every year. So I was in court one day and doing protection order hearings on domestic violence cases. And the defendant was presenting one way and the victims were presenting another way. Long story made short, as the day went on, defendant, and they all kind of looked the same, the power and control. Sheriff brings the next defendant out on the wall, and it was a woman that was chained up, and she was a defendant in the prison garb, but looked like one of these victims that I'd been hearing from all morning. Looked down at the file, it was a prostitution charge. And I didn't understand in my brain, because I thought of the pretty woman scenario, all the myths that an old white guy like me is gonna think in America, I was thinking, and then I found out everything you've been discussing this morning, I found out, and that's what led me to try to figure out how to treat these folks differently.
So before we get into the mechanics of what the court looks like, because I think it's important to understand the nuts and bolts, can you talk about what judges can do in terms of addressing human trafficking? Because oftentimes I hear judges say, well, I'm not presiding over human trafficking trials, or I don't see those types of cases in my court. So are there other things that judges can be doing?
Yeah, there's, number one, you have control over your very own docket and the cases that come before you, and that's kind of how I started. As a prostitution case would come through the door, I would call the probation officer and say, hey, what resources do we have available? And that's really how it started, with one or two defendants, and then we started to learn what treatment worked, what treatment didn't work, what could we do. You take that now to, and I'm happy to talk to any judges afterwards, but still staying neutral, but pushing the bounds of an advocacy role. I called the mayor the president of the city council and the chief of police together, and we had a discussion about human trafficking in Columbus, Ohio, and what I see and what the facts are. And that has led to a revolution in our community with regard to how we look at and treat this. And that was all just because I have a judge in front of my name, and they, for some reason, answer the call. You know, they don't realize I'm only a municipal court judge, right? So a judge can do a lot, from calling treatment partners together. I mean, I even remember when our main treatment facility was still treating women from the 60-year-old alcohol and drug addict mentality. You know, my team walked through the door and said, what's going on here? Our clients are different than these other clients. What's different about them? We started seeing some of the stuff that you guys were talking about, the trauma responses, and then treating them differently with a new module of treatment, which we'll probably get to this morning.
So can you walk us through the program? How are individuals identified? What type of interventions are they receiving? And do they come back before you?
Oh man, Danielle doesn't have the easy questions. So we have a short diversion type court, like I believe New York still does. We call it Catch 101. Catch just stands for changing actions to change habits. And we have a short version of that, which is about 3 classes. That's for the person who's not ready to commit yet, but we want to give them resources. So they basically come in, and it's a diversion program with an incentive we offer. If you take this short program, you get your cases dismissed. So that's a very big incentive to get hundreds of women a year more information and resources. Plus, they get introduced to my staff, and they're required to come to one of our long catch court program sessions as part of their program. So they then get indoctrinated into the feeling, the community, and the women helping women aspect, which is critical to treatment. So they get indoctrinated to that, and we've had several women then step up to the longer version of it. And then we have our 2-year full catch program. So you come in, and it's a voluntary program. A woman has to say, yes, I want treatment. We don't force anyone into the human trafficking court. If they say, and I have to say, they have quite a sense of humor, these ladies do, because sometimes they call it, instead of changing actions to change habits, they say caught at the corner hooking. Yeah, I want that program. I'm like, oh, you know, so they have great senses of humor. So they have to come in saying they want it. Pretty much every woman who's in the industry knows what the program is, and it's kind of a matter of time when they're ready. We have a lot of assessments that take place. We use the change. I just lost the change model is the standard assessment. I see some heads shaking. We also do the ACE score. You guys do childhood adverse childhood experiences. It's a 10-question test. Reveals a lot of information from that, and then we also do a basic trauma, and then later we do a human trafficking assessment. We have weekly court hearings. Now, this special docket is an actual docket of our court. So each week we preside over catch court. There's 50 women in it now. It's probably more than that. And they meet in our courtroom, and we have requirements of having a hearing. And I talk to each and every one of them. It's required. Our Supreme Court requires me to have dialogue in open court with them for at least 5 minutes. So before court, we have all the notes. I have all the notes that all the treatment providers and staff has prepared for me. I read through that so that I can have a dialogue and say, hey, Bruce, how's it going this week? How's your family? You know, hey, good job phasing up, you know, and all that stuff. So there's a lot of affirmation from me as the judge to them. They also get a chance to speak, ask questions of their sisters. So those weekly court hearings, they go on every week for 2 years. That's how the court program works. There's basic incentives as they progress through the system. They get different awards, phases. We have a burn the ships necklace they get when they go to the final phase, and that's our theme is burn the ships, you know, the old story of Hernan Cortez when the guys wanted to go back to Spain. He said, burn the ships, we're going forward with our new life. So that we have burn the ships, big ceremony there. A lot of things like that. And it really looked, in an hour before court, we have lunch. So we have volunteers bring lunch in, and it's totally informal. They sit around, they have fun, they eat lunch, they talk about what they want to talk about, they ask each other questions. It's a beautiful thing to watch that go on before court starts. That's almost as much as necessary as anything. You want to know about the residential treatment and all that, or you?
Please, and specifically how their salient needs are being addressed. So things like trauma, or we hear a lot about their dysfunctional relationships that they've had in their life. So how are those issues being addressed?
Thank you, Danielle. So we really highly suggest that you go into residential treatment. And I hear everybody talking all over the country, including today, about how we don't have residential treatment for human trafficking victims. You got to get that. Or you at least have to have female treatment centers that you can kind of push into a trauma base. We were lucky in Columbus to have 2 gender-specific treatment facilities, so that's pretty cool. But most 99% of these women don't have a safe place to stay. Safety is the key for this group. So we put them in residential treatment, which is nice. They're apartments, and they have group therapy. They have individual therapy, and the group and individual therapy revolves around mother-daughter relationships, parent-child relationships, healthy relationships with the opposite sex, and job skills. But what we use a model called seeking safety. Has anybody heard of seeking safety? Okay, got to write that down. Someday you'll use that, okay? So seeking safety is important because it's the only prescribed treatment for dual diagnosis trauma and substance abuse. Okay, so we've talked about how these guys have mental health and all this other stuff, but this is the one treatment that's evidence-based, that's working for us. And then we combine seeking safety with EMDR treatment. That's a kind of cutting edge eye movement, what does it stand for, somebody? Eye movement, something, something. So it's a thing that they do with the eyes and light, and they take them back through traumatic experiences, and it's like a miracle for most of them. They can take these trauma experiences and get rid of them. Because one thing we've also touched on today that I want to go deep into is the drug abuse. We're finding out that, like the judge said, we're finding out that women are using drugs to medicate their trauma, and we're finding out if you can take that trauma and get that out, they don't want to use drugs anymore. So my old thought of, hey, they're drug addicts that need to sell their bodies to get their drug, that's totally wrong. I'm totally ignorant. So we're finding that paradigm shift out there with regard to the treatment. Super, super big thing to push on that.
That's a really great point, because I think oftentimes, and this happens a lot in drug court settings, we'll send folks to drug court and then wonder why they're not compliant, quote unquote,
Yes,
or why it's not working. And the reality is because underlying issues like trauma aren't being addressed. So that leads me to my next question. I see we're getting short on time here already. What do you do when they come back? So we heard from the last panel that we never want to give up on folks, right? But we have to recognize that recidivism is going to be part of the process. These are individuals that are so deeply entrenched in the life, they may still be coerced by their exploiters and their traffickers, so they may still be out there working. So we recognize that they're going to come back. So now you have your weekly compliance calendar. You have somebody coming back before you. Maybe they got rearrested or they haven't been going to their residential program. What do you do?
I send them to jail. And it's usually for quite a long time. What happens with this population because of their problems with relationships is they'll meet a guy somewhere, they'll be back in contact with their trafficker, they'll fall in love with him, Stockholm, I've seen all this, and they'll relapse, okay, and then they'll be off and running. So when they come back, the standard rule is you're going to do 60 days in jail before we consider accepting you back into the program if they even want back in. So it's a pretty stiff penalty. I get that, and some of you may disagree with that, but I've been doing this since 2009. it usually seems to get their attention, and that also gives them time enough away from all those stresses and issues in their lives that causing them to go back, that they can sort of find themselves again, if you will. And occasionally I'll let them out early if we get everything lines up. Another real important part of this is social enterprises. So if you do this court, we have 2 social enterprises that are formed. One's a catering company that hires 27 of our women right now. Another brand new one is a cleaning company called She Has a Name Cleaning. The other is Freedom a la carte Catering. She Has a Name Cleaning hires about 10 of our women right now. It's basic cleaning, but they make great, great workers. And then, go ahead. Sorry, I got one more.
Well, what about other legal incentives? So you have somebody that goes through the program and completes the program. So these are great incentives while they're in the program. Upon completion of their case, are there other legal remedies available for them?
Yes, we got 5 minutes, so we'll wrap this up. So basically, we do the expungement that Attorney General Owens was talking about. It's a really, really great thing. We also, the prosecutors offer expungement. It's kind of a complicated process. So we'll offer a withdrawal of the plea and total dismissal of their cases, which then they can get sealed. Also, we've talked about our numbers were low of success stories and when we were a corrections-based program. I don't know if you have special dockets. If you have a special docket, it was all kind of, what's wrong with you, and it turned into me kind of relaxing and saying, I wonder what happened to you, and that sort of mindset, that's led to an increase in our retention rate. We're right now in 2016, 69% of the women have signed up for the program are on track to graduate, whereas before we did this shift, only 14% were. So we're really onto something. Now, we're going to finish it with some of the ladies. These are brave ladies that have given my permission to allow me to show their photographs. I guess I'm not going to be able to really tell their stories, but this is the getting into catch court, what we saw when they walked through the door, and then what they look like today. So this is Brittany. I've changed their names. So go ahead. Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of stories you guys can have down here. My heart's for you, Atlanta. Go ahead with the Michelle. Go ahead, next one. This, I'm stopping on her for just a second because she now works for the prosecutor's office that prosecuted her for her crimes. I don't know if that's ever happened in America, but I called the elected prosecutor. I said, man, what are you doing? You're running for election. She's got an aggravated trafficking and drugs conviction, man. You're going to bring that up. And he said, kind of like, man up, Herbert. He says, she can recognize a victim better than anybody else on my staff. And he put her in the victim intake department. And he said they describe it when a victim walks in now, it's a totally different atmosphere because they see her, they connect on some amazing level. It calms her down. They get better information. She feels taken care of, and they are able to prosecute the bad guys better. So it's a really cool story. Go ahead. Oh wow! Oh my God! Look at that. I mean, that's amazing. And this lady now manages a whole McDonald's by herself. Has her daughter back there. I could talk forever. That's a great story. Go ahead. This lady, amazing. Yeah. This is Barb. She goes by her real name. She's, and that's her up on my bench. I don't know how she got that picture, but she did 15 years in prison, and we don't have time, do we? We're out, right? Okay. Okay, so I was going to go to the women's prison for the first time to talk to the women prisoners, and she overheard me asking, because I didn't want to go. I was afraid, because I figured, I'd seen the movie Green Mile and all that, So I figured they were going to kill me. And Barb overhears me talking to one of my staff. It says, are you going to reformatory? And I said, I don't know. Why? Like she's horning in on my gig now, And she goes, well, if you go, I have to go. And I already kind of gave away the story, but I didn't know why she had to go. And she kept coming back. Your Honor, can I approach the bench? Yes, come on up. Are you going to ORW or not? And I'm like, well, I guess I am. She says, I'm going with you. So I was trying to get out of it and all that, but I didn't. Went up, I gave my spiel, kind of like a dead audience. She gets up, she had them all crying, and all this other stuff. And then the warden says, do you want to take a tour of the prison? I'm like, oh, heck no, I'm out, you know. And she's like, yeah, we're going for a tour. I'm like, oh, God. So we're walking around, and she goes, hey, can we go in Lincoln? Like, you know, I've seen the dogs, I've seen the artwork, you know, all the stuff they do at the prison. You know, I'm ready to go out. So we go in Lincoln, all these prisons, or all these cage, you know, the cells. And she goes, can I go in 381? I'm like, what are we doing now? Warden says, yeah. So they press the button, doors open, two big ladies come out. She goes in, looks around, comes right back out and walks to me. She goes, Judge, this is why I had to come here today. I'm like, why? She goes, well, I haven't been back here since I did 9 years in that cell. And, you know, I thought to myself, you know, wow, God just let me see the total redemption of a human being against my own will, you know, and it gives me inspiration that these women are worth fighting for. I mean, they are worth it. They're the most incredible people you'll find yourself, but you kind of have to get into the long game. The short game, you know, they're in and out of your system. You never get to meet them. If you put them on probation and work with them for 2 years, you get the stories like this. You have the successes like this. So I'm really urging, you know, kind of the long term. Do we have one more, or are we done? Is that it? Okay. So that's it for us.
Well, and I just want to thank you so much for being here. And Judge Herbert is going to be here for a few more hours if any of you have questions. And there's some phenomenal interviews available online that have been done with Judge Herbert, and also a fantastic video. So if you want more information, please come see one of us today. We'll be here. Thank you.
Thank you.